The following events are based on a true story. Names and details have been altered to protect the identities of those involved, but the horror remains untouched. Watch at your own risk. Story 1. The Vanishing Hitchhiker on Route 66. I never used to believe in ghost stories, but after what happened to me on Route 66, I can't drive at night without feeling like I'm being watched. It was past midnight, and the gas gauge in my car was flirting with empty. The nearest station was an old, flickering relic of the past, the kind you see in movies about forgotten highways. As I slowed down, my headlights caught a figure standing near the sign, a woman, alone, her pale dress almost blending into the fog that clung to the cracked pavement. She didn't wave or call for help, just stood there, staring at the road as if waiting for something. Against my better judgment, I pulled over. "Need a ride?" I asked, but she didn't answer, just opened the door and slid into the passenger seat. She smelled faintly of rain and something else, something old. I put the car in drive. For the first few miles, she said nothing. She just stared out the window, her fingers resting lightly on her lap, unmoving. The silence in the car felt thick, heavy, like the air before a storm. I tried making small talk. "Where are you headed?" No response. "You from around here?" Nothing, just the quiet hum of the engine and the occasional crackle from the old radio. Her reflection in the glass looked strange, almost blurred, like she wasn't really there. Then finally, she spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Just keep going." I swallowed hard, gripping the steering wheel tighter. Something about the way she said it sent a chill down my spine. I thought about turning back, about stopping at the next gas station and letting her out. But there was something about her presence, something that made me keep driving. Then, as we passed an old roadside diner, she turned her head slowly toward me. Her voice was so soft I almost didn't hear it. "This is where I died." A cold wave of dread washed over me. My hands tightened on the wheel as I forced myself to glance at her. But when I turned, the seat was empty. My breath caught in my throat. The car swerved slightly as panic clawed at my chest. I gripped the wheel, my pulse hammering in my ears. The passenger door hadn't opened, and I hadn't heard a sound. She was just gone. Then the radio crackled. Static filled the car, followed by a faint, distant voice, distorted, broken. At first I thought it was picking up a random station, but as I strained to listen, I realized it was a distress call. A woman's voice, filled with desperation. "Please, someone help me. I don't know where I am. It's so dark." My hands felt numb as I twisted the dial, but no matter what station I turned to, the same voice played, the same terrified plea. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the radio cut to silence. I pulled into the diner's parking lot, my chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. I needed answers. Stepping inside, I found an elderly man behind the counter. His eyes flicked up from the newspaper, and before I could speak, he said, "You saw her, didn't you?" I stared at him. "Who?" I asked, but my voice came out hoarse. He set the paper down with a sigh. "The hitchhiker." The diner felt suddenly too small, the walls pressing in as the man continued. "You're not the first. People pick her up, always near that old gas station. She never speaks, except to tell them where she died." He exhaled deeply. "None of them ever make it home." A chill crept up my spine. "But I'm still here." The man studied me, then shook his head. Not for long. As I turned back toward the door, my reflection in the glass looked wrong. It was standing still, staring back at me, even as I moved. And behind me, in the reflection, she was sitting in the passenger seat, waiting. The following events are based on a true story. Names and details have been altered to protect the identities of those involved, but the horror remains untouched. Watch at your own risk. Story 2. The Man in the Tunnel, Holland Tunnel, NYC. I never pick up passengers this late. Not anymore. But that night, I was desperate for a last fare before heading home. The app pinged, a pickup near Greenwich Street, just a couple of blocks from the Holland Tunnel. The rider's name was Howard, no last initial, no profile picture, just 5 stars. He was already standing on the curb when I pulled up. Tall, thin, dressed in a dark coat, despite the humidity hanging over the city like a damp blanket. He didn't say much, just slid into the back seat and murmured, "Holland Tunnel, New Jersey side." I nodded, hit start ride, and pulled onto the road. That's when my GPS flickered. At first it was subtle, a brief stutter, a recalculating message. Then as I merged into the tunnel entrance, the screen warped. The usual. Blue route disappeared, replaced by gray, unmapped streets. The arrow that represented my car veered off course into nothingness. I shot a glance at my passenger in the rearview mirror. He sat unnaturally still, hands folded in his lap. Face obscured by the dim tunnel lighting. Something about him felt off. Then the radio crackled. Instead of music or static, a voice, clear but distant, filled the car. Breaking news, Holland Tunnel disaster, partial collapse near midsection, multiple casualties feared. The voice faded, swallowed by static. My fingers clenched that wheel, that accident. Hadn't that happened decades ago? My stomach tightened as I reached for the radio dial, twisting it frantically. But no matter how much I adjusted the station, the voice remained, monotone, calm, delivering breaking news from a night that shouldn't exist anymore. Rescue teams are on site, but hopes are fading. Survivors reported seeing something moving in the smoke. The words cut out, just static now. I exhaled sharply, forcing myself to focus on the road. The tunnel stretched ahead, dim and endless, the usual fluorescent lights flickering sporadically. I knew this drive. I had done it 100 times before. But something was wrong. The tunnel felt longer, like it wasn't leading anywhere. I glanced at the rearview mirror again. That's when my chest tightened. Howard had no reflection. The seat was empty in the mirror, but I could feel him there, his presence heavy, pressing against the air like something unseen was taking up more space than it should. My breath came in short, uneven bursts. I should pull over. I should turn around. But my hands felt glued to the wheel, my foot steady on the gas, as if I had no control over the car anymore. "Hey, man," I forced out, trying to sound casual, but my voice cracked. "Everything good back there?" No answer, just the sound of my own breathing, the hum of the engine, and something else. Something faint, like dripping water. This time. Howard's face was visible, too visible. He was leaning forward, close enough that if I reached back, I might touch him. His eyes met mine in the reflection, dark and hollow, like pits where light couldn't reach. I slammed the brakes. The car screeched to a halt. The tunnel should have been packed, late-night truckers and other rideshare drivers passing through, but there was nothing. No cars, no honking, just empty, endless road behind me. The radio crackled again. A different voice. Softer. Wet. I never made it out. A whisper. It wasn't coming from the speakers. It was behind me. My fingers trembled on the gear shift. I needed to move. I needed to go. My foot slammed the gas, tires screeching against the pavement as I sped forward. The tunnel blurred around me, walls closing in, the lights above flickering wildly like they were about to burn out. Then, the smell. Thick, cloying like something old and damp and rotting in the dark. The kind of scent that lingers long after the body is gone. I gagged. The stench filled my lungs, coated the back of my throat. My vision blurred, spots dancing at the edges. But I couldn't stop. I just had to get out of this tunnel, out of whatever the hell was happening. Then I saw it, the wall. The tunnel ahead was blocked. No exit, no curve leading to daylight, just a solid mass of bricks, cracked and old, like something abandoned decades ago. I slammed the brakes again, swerving, tires shrieking. The car skidded sideways. My heart pounded. No way, no fucking way. The Holland Tunnel wasn't bricked up. This wasn't real. I turned, my breath heaving. Howard was grinning, teeth too white, lips too thin, like his face was stretched in the wrong direction. He tilted his head. I never made it out. He whispered again. My stomach dropped. The radio crackled one last time. Officials confirm all victims perished. No survivors recovered from the 1955 collapse. The tunnel remains sealed. The voice faded. The static stopped. The car engine died. Darkness swallowed me. The headlights flickered once, twice, then nothing. Silence. Even my own breathing sounded muted, absorbed by the void pressing in. I reached for my phone, my fingers shaking. No signal. The screen glowed faintly before blinking out. A sharp knock echoed against the driver's side window. I jumped, twisting toward it. But there was nothing there, just the cold glass, fogging, slightly, as if something had exhaled against it. The knock came again. 3 slow taps, measured, deliberate. I turned fully now, but before I could react, the passenger door opened. A rush of air, stale and wet, swept into the car. I gasped, the scent of rot sinking into my lungs. I turned back to Howard, but the back seat was empty. No sign of him, no sound, just the open door, yawning into the blackness of the tunnel. I didn't wait. I slammed the door shut, fumbled for the key, and twisted it hard. The engine coughed once, then roared back to life. I didn't look back. I didn't check the mirror. I just threw the car into drive and gunned it. The tunnel stretched on forever. The bricked-up wall, gone. After what felt like hours, a pinprick of light appeared ahead. The exit. I nearly sobbed with relief as I burst out onto the New Jersey side, gasping in fresh air. I pulled over, shaking, my hands white-knuckled around the wheel. When I finally dared to check the back seat, the seatbelt was fastened. The app notification popped up. Ride completed, passenger dropped off. I stared at it, my pulse roaring in my ears, my heart jackhammered against my ribs. That wasn't possible. I swiped over to the trip log, the route. It was wrong. A tangled mess of lines, doubling back on itself. No clear start or end. Then I saw the timestamp. The ride had lasted 1 minute. I should delete the app, throw my phone into the Hudson. But I know it won't matter, because in the rearview mirror, the seatbelt is fastened again. The following events are based on a true story. Names and details have been altered to protect the identities of those involved, but the horror remains untouched. Watch at your own risk. Story 3. The Lone Car in Death Valley, California State Route 190. I never believed in the stories people told about Death Valley. Whispers of lost souls, mirages that weren't just tricks of the heat, and roads that led nowhere but still took you somewhere. I just wanted to capture the vast emptiness, the way the dying light carved jagged shadows across the sand. It was supposed to be just another photo series, just another long drive down State Route 190. The sun was melting into the horizon when I pulled over to get a shot of the desolation. The air was thick with the scent of hot asphalt and dust. I set up my camera, framing the lone stretch of road that vanished into the distance. Click. Another shot. Click. Then, just as the shutter snapped, something shifted in my rearview mirror. Headlights. A car. Way back. Barely a speck. It wasn't unusual, except for one thing. It never got closer. I got back in the car, shaking off the unease. Maybe it was just someone else enjoying the view, a fellow traveler stopping when I did. But as I drove on, the headlights remained exactly where they were, always in my mirror, always the same distance away. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Still, they never gained on me, never turned off onto another road, just there. I sped up, testing it. 80 miles an hour, then 90. The road was empty, straight, stretching endlessly through the desert. Yet no matter how fast I went, those headlights never shrank, never changed. Like they weren't chasing me, but just existing behind me, watching. By the time I spotted the gas station, my nerves were frayed. The place was the only sign of life I'd seen for miles. A rusted-out building with a flickering neon sign that barely clung to life. I pulled in fast, gravel crunching under my tires, and threw the car into park. When I glanced at the road behind me, my stomach dropped. The headlights were gone. I stepped inside, the bell above the door jangling too loudly in the silence. The air smelled of oil and old cigarettes. Behind the counter, the attendant, a wiry man with sun-leathered skin, stood still, not looking up. "Pump number 2, I said, sliding cash across the counter. He didn't move, didn't even blink. Then, in a low, rasping voice, he asked, "They followed you, didn't they?" A chill ran down my spine. "What?" I forced a laugh, but it came out thin, uncertain. The attendant still wouldn't look at me. His fingers twitched against the counter, like he was thinking about saying more but decided against it. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, glancing over my shoulder at the empty road outside. The man exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Doesn't matter if you believe me," he muttered. "Just don't stop again. Not until you're out of the valley." His voice was barely above a whisper now. "They don't like it when you notice them." Then finally, he lifted his gaze. His eyes weren't angry or mocking. They were filled with something worse. Pity. I didn't say another word. I just grabbed my change, walked out, and filled my tank as fast as I could. My hands were shaking. It was stupid. I didn't believe in ghost stories, in desert legends, in shadowy figures lurking where they shouldn't be. And yet, as I got back in my car and locked the doors, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. When I finally hit the highway again, I grabbed my camera from the passenger seat and scrolled through the photos I'd taken earlier. My breath caught in my throat. They were in every single shot. Dark, blurred figures standing in the road behind my car, their shapes just barely visible against the fading light. I had been alone. I knew I had been alone. But the photos told a different story. I slammed the camera down, my pulse hammering in my ears. I wanted to tell myself it was a glitch, some trick of the light, But deep down, I knew better. My foot pressed harder on the gas. The road stretched endlessly before me, swallowed in darkness, and for the first time, I wasn't sure if I was driving out of something or further into it. Then, in my rearview mirror, the headlights reappeared. No sound, no engine, just two pale orbs glowing in the night, keeping perfect pace with me no matter how fast I drove. And then as my stomach turned to ice, I saw something between them. Tall, shifting figures standing in the beams of the headlights, their silhouettes too long, too thin. And this time, I knew they weren't behind me. They were getting closer. The following events are based on a true story. Names and details have been altered to protect the identities of those involved, but the horror remains untouched. Watch at your own risk. Story 4. The Rest Stop Phantom. I-90, Chicago to Seattle. I've been on the road for almost 16 hours straight, my eyelids heavy, the monotonous hum of my rig lulling me into a dangerous daze. The highway signs blur together, their green glow blending with the endless stretch of black asphalt ahead. Somewhere past the Montana border, exhaustion finally wins. I spot an isolated rest stop just off I-90, barely illuminated by a flickering overhead light. No other trucks, no movement, just an empty lot and a single car idling near the far end. That's the first thing that feels off. The sedan's engine hums softly in the silence, its exhaust curling into the cold night air. But the driver, he doesn't move. He just sits there, hands on the wheel, face locked in a blank stare straight ahead. Something about it unsettles me, but I shake it off. Probably just another tired driver taking a break. I park my rig a few spaces away, stretch my legs, and decide to check on the guy. I knock on the driver's side window. No reaction. Not even a twitch. My knuckles rap against the glass again, harder this time. Still nothing. The dome light inside is off, but the dim glow from the dashboard reveals the outline of a man, rigid, almost unnatural. My gut tightens. A corpse, maybe? A drunk passed out at the wheel. I reach for the door handle hesitantly and pull. It swings open effortlessly. The seat is empty. I take a step back, heart hammering, brain scrambling for an explanation. I saw him. He was right there. My breath fogs in the frigid air as my mind races. Then from inside the car, the radio crackles to life, static hissing through the speakers. Then a voice, distorted, hollow, like it's speaking through a tunnel. You shouldn't have stopped. The words slither down my spine, wrapping around my ribs like ice-cold fingers. I stumble backward, slam the door shut, and bolt for my rig. I don't look back. I don't check the sedan again. I just throw the truck into gear and tear out of that lot, tires screeching against the pavement. It takes me nearly an hour to shake off the adrenaline, to convince myself I imagined it. Lack of sleep does weird things to the brain, right? Maybe the guy left while I wasn't looking. Maybe the radio picked up some random transmission. Then I see it. Up ahead, another rest stop looms out of the darkness, a carbon copy of the last one. Same broken streetlight, same emptiness, and parked at the far end of the lot. The same sedan, its engine running, waiting for me. I tell myself it's just a coincidence. Plenty of dark sedans on the road, plenty of tired drivers pulling into rest stops. But as I slow down, my stomach knots. The car is parked in the exact same spot as before, idling softly. The driver's seat is still empty. I feel a tightness in my throat, an instinctive urge to keep driving, to never stop again until I reach Seattle. But my body betrays me. My foot eases off the gas. Some sick curiosity, or maybe just pure disbelief, makes me pull in, though I keep my rig closer. To the exit this time. I cut the engine, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turn white. The rest stop is silent. Too silent. Even at this hour, there should be some sound. The rustling of trees, the distant roar of a passing semi. But there's nothing. The world feels muted, like I've stepped into a dead space where time doesn't move. My eyes lock onto the sedan. It's the same make, the same model, and its engine is still running. But something is different now. The passenger door is open. A sharp chill prickles the back of my neck. I scan the lot, expecting to see someone, anyone, moving in the shadows. But there's no one. Just the empty car and the gaping door like an invitation or a warning. My fingers twitch against the steering wheel, my instincts screaming at me to leave. I force a breath, trying to steady my thoughts. Maybe this is some elaborate prank. Maybe I just imagined that voice. Then the radio in my truck crackles to life. Static hisses through the speakers, swallowing the silence. My pulse pounds in my ears as the distorted voice returns. A low rasp that feels too close, like it's whispering right behind me. You shouldn't have stopped. A cold sweat breaks across my forehead. My hands move on autopilot, reaching for the keys, but they fumble. My breathing is too fast, though too shallow. The engine finally roars to life, and I throw the truck into gear. My headlights sweep across the sedan as I pull away. That's when I see it. The driver's seat is no longer empty. A shape sits in the car now, rigid, unmoving, staring straight ahead. Its face is just a blur in the darkness, but I don't need to see it clearly to know. I am not alone out here. I slam my foot on the gas, my truck lurching forward, tires screeching against the pavement as I tear out of the lot. The highway stretches ahead, endless and black, but I don't feel safe. Not anymore. I check my mirrors every few seconds, expecting to see headlights behind me. My skin crawls with the sensation of being watched, though I know I'm alone in the cab. I crank the radio up to drown out my thoughts, but all I hear is static. I keep driving mile after mile, state line after state line, refusing to stop. My eyes burn, my body aches, but I push forward. Rest stops blur past me, glowing islands of fluorescent light in the void. I don't pull in, I don't dare, but just as my exhaustion starts winning again, I spot something ahead. Another rest stop, another empty lot, and parked at the far end. The same sedan, its engine running, waiting for me. My grip tightens on the wheel as I speed past the rest stop, my heart hammering against my ribs. I don't even look directly at the sedan this time. I can feel it there, waiting, like a shadow that refuses to be outrun. My mind scrambles for logic, for reason, but there is none. This isn't exhaustion. This isn't some roadside coincidence. I flick my eyes to the rearview mirror, praying I don't see headlights trailing me. The road behind is empty. For a moment, I almost convince myself that I've escaped it, that whatever this is, it's tied to the rest stops, not the highway itself. But then, through the static-laced silence of my cab, the radio crackles again. The voice is different, this time. Still hollow, still distorted, but now it carries something else. Something worse. A smirk. Like whatever this thing is, it's enjoying this. My stomach twists, bile rising in my throat. I reach for the dial, twisting it hard, trying to shut the radio off. But it won't. The static pulses, surging and receding like breath. I floor the accelerator, gripping the wheel like it's the only thing tethering me to reality. I pass. Another mile marker, then another. Signs for upcoming exits flicker by, each one tempting me to turn off, to find a town, a diner, somewhere with people. But deep down, I know. This thing isn't bound to rest, stops. If it wanted to follow me, it could. It's choosing not to, not yet. I don't know how long I'd drive like that, caught in a limbo of fear and exhaustion. But eventually my body betrays me. My head bobs forward, my vision blurs, and I know I'm seconds away from nodding off at the wheel. I can't keep going. Like this, I have to stop. Another rest stop appears up ahead, almost as if the highway itself has read my thoughts. My breath catches in my throat. I already know what I'll see before my headlights sweep across the lot. The sedan, the idling engine, and now, the driver. He's standing outside the car. A breath, long, slow, deliberate, fills the cab. My vision tunnels, hands slick on the wheel. I can hear it breathing inside the truck. And then the voice speaks one last time. Next stop. The following events are based on a true story. Names and details have been altered to protect the identities of those involved, but the horror remains untouched. Watch at your own risk. Story 5. The Last Toll Booth. Pennsylvania Turnpike. I never liked driving alone at night, but I had no choice. The Pennsylvania Turnpike stretched before me like an endless black ribbon. The silence in my car, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional whoosh of a passing truck. I kept my hands tight on the wheel, my eyes flicking, between the dark road ahead and the green highway signs glowing in my headlights. There was something unsettling about how empty the road felt, like I was the only person left in the world. I saw the toll booth ahead and slowed down, fishing for a few bills in my cup holder. The small booth sat under the dim yellow glow of a single overhead lamp, its windows fogged with condensation. The attendant inside barely moved as I rolled down my window. He was older, his uniform slightly disheveled, his expression blank. When he finally turned to me, his eyes seemed distant, unfocused, like he was looking through me rather than at me. I handed him the money, and he moved with agonizing slowness, counting out the change with fingers that trembled slightly. He finally handed me the change, his fingers cold as they brushed against my palm. But just as I was about to pull away, he leaned in slightly, his breath barely more than a whisper against the night air. "Don't look in your rear-view mirror." A chill spread through my spine like ice water. I blinked, unsure if I had heard him correctly. His face remained expressionless, his hands now gripping the counter of the booth, as if bracing himself for something. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I forced a nervous chuckle. "What?" I asked, but he only shook his head, his lips pressing into a thin line. I didn't ask again. I pressed the gas pedal and sped off, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The night seemed darker, the road more desolate than before. The words echoed in my head, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. Don't look in your rearview mirror. It was ridiculous. Just an old man trying to scare me, right? But the more I tried to ignore it, the stronger the compulsion grew. My fingers twitched against the wheel, my breath quick and shallow. Don't do it. Just drive. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was in the car with me. The air in the back seat felt thick, like a presence pressing against my skin. I bit my lip, swallowing hard. My pulse pounded, as my eyes darted toward the mirror before I could stop myself. And then I saw it. A pale, grinning figure sat in my back seat, its face smooth and waxy, its mouth stretched into an unnatural smile. But it was the eyes, or rather, the absence of them, that made my stomach lurch. Empty sockets, black as the void, stared back at me. My throat closed around a scream, my hands jerking the wheel instinctively. The car veered, tires screeching as I lost control. The world spun, a violent impact. Metal groaned and glass shattered. The breath was knocked from my lungs as everything turned upside down. Then, darkness. When I woke, I was lying in the grass, my body aching, my skin damp with morning dew. My car sat idling a few feet away, headlights cutting through the mist. The driver's side door hung open. I had no memory of crawling out. My hands shook as I struggled to my feet, my knees weak beneath me. And then I remembered. The mirror, the thing in my back seat. Heart hammering, I forced myself to look inside the car. The back seat was empty. No pale figure, no grinning horror. But something was wrong. The air smelled wrong, damp, almost rotten. And on the seat, where someone should have been sitting, the fabric was torn. Deep scratches carved into the upholstery, like fingernails had dug into it. I didn't wait. I climbed into my car, slammed the door, and drove. I didn't stop until the sun was high in the sky, until I reached a gas station crowded with people. Real people. Only then did I allow myself to breathe. But even now, days later, I can't stop thinking about it. About the toll booth attendant, about what he said, and most of all about that thing in my back seat. Because sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone in my car, I swear I can feel eyes on me, even though I know they aren't there. I didn't tell anyone, not the gas station clerk, not my friends, not even my family. How could I? Hey, I think I saw something impossible in my back seat last night, and now I'm scared to drive alone. No one would believe me. Hell, I barely believed myself. So I pushed it down, buried it deep, told myself it was exhaustion, a trick of the light, my overactive imagination. But deep down, I knew better. For the next few nights, I avoided driving after dark. I made excuses to leave work early, declined invitations, anything to keep myself from being alone on the road. But life doesn't stop for fear. A week later, I found myself behind the wheel again, heading home after staying late at a friend's place. The road was quiet, the hum of the engine steady. Everything was normal, until I glanced at my rearview mirror. At first there was nothing, just the dark back seat and the faint glow of streetlights passing overhead. But then, a flicker, a shadow where there shouldn't be one. My breath caught, my grip on the wheel tightening. It's just your imagination, just nerves. But my stomach churned with that same sickening dread from before. I told myself not to look again, but I did. This time, I didn't see a figure. No grinning, eyeless thing lurking in the back seat. But there was something. The scratches on the upholstery had deepened, the fabric torn wider, exposing the foam beneath. Worse, there were prints, faint but unmistakable, handprints pressed into the leather, as if something had just been sitting there. I slammed the mirror upward so I wouldn't have to see. My heart pounded as I pressed the gas, desperate to get home. The radio crackled, static, then silence. My phone, plugged into the charger, flickered and died. And then from somewhere behind me, a sound, a slow, deliberate exhale. I nearly drove off the road. My body went rigid, every instinct screaming, "Don't turn around." Don't look, don't acknowledge it. I stared straight ahead, forcing myself to breathe evenly, gripping the wheel so hard my fingers ached. The air behind me felt heavier, charged like the moment before a lightning strike. My ears strained for any sound, shuffling, whispering, breathing, but the silence was suffocating. And then, as suddenly as it had come, the feeling vanished. My phone screen lit up. The radio returned to normal. My rearview mirror, angled away, showed nothing but the empty road. I didn't sleep that night. I sat awake in bed, staring at my car through the window, waiting for something, anything, to move inside. But nothing did. By morning, I convinced myself it was over. Whatever had happened, whatever I had seen, was behind me now. But I was wrong, because when I opened my car door the next day, the smell hit me first, damp, rotting, like something had been sitting in there for too long. And on the dashboard, carved into the plastic with jagged, uneven letters, were 3 words: "Don't look back."